Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. What's going on?
Well, we're having a big celebration tonight.
Oh, what's going on?
You see the balloons? We got balloons.
Oh, it's
I
awesome.
spent all sorts of time planning this. As you can see, this took just a monumental effort to get the set in order. So while we have been on this live stream tonight, just in the last hour, we have exceeded 10,000 subscribers.
Oh, that's great.
It's our 10,000 subscriber celebration party.
They say the first 10,000 is always the hardest 10,000 to get. Your next 10,000, your first 100,000 are just around the corner.
Well, I will tell you this, Steve, that the first 5,000 took me about 6 years, and the next 5,000 took me about 8 months.
There you go. Growth.
Got Steve Hellwagon on the line from BUCKNUTS. Join him there on 247 Sports. He is a Big Ten senior writer. All right, Steve, talking about the Buckeyes. So we had a conversation with Steve last week, and it's a perfect May/June subject. I certainly don't want to cut off any real football Ohio State talk of anything going on right now, so we can delve into that if there's anything. But then we'll continue our list of questions. So anything before we dive into excruciating losses, Steve, that's going on with the Buckeyes right now?
No, it's pretty quiet right now. I think the semester for the spring has ended. I think most of the athletes are probably away right now, unless some of them are enrolled for the May semester, this 3 or 4 week period. And then the summer semester will begin in early June. And that'll be when the intensive work really takes place, obviously getting ready for the upcoming season. So I'm sure that the athletes on campus, I would assume most of them are on campus, are working out now and getting ready. And again, as we say, I saw somebody posted we're only 110 days from the start of the 2019 season. So it'll be here before we know it. And the magazines will be out here in a few weeks. I keep seeing the Phil Steele updates, and there have been some various top 25 lists.
Steve and I last week talked about exhilarating, important wins for Ohio State over the last 25 years since Steve has been really locked into Ohio State football, covering the Buckeyes. So now we turn the tables, and we're talking about far fewer games to select from. But, of course, the impact of the losses when you expect to win all the games is really devastating at times, and has been for a number of teams that we both watched through the years. So over the last 25 years or so, during that same time frame, can you in any way rank excruciating, painful losses?
Oh, there have been many. Go back to the 90s, and we touched on this. And as a quick refresher, the top wins were Miami for the national championship in the Fiesta Bowl, Alabama in the semifinals of the playoff in 2014 to go on and play Oregon, which you'd put that Oregon game in there as well somewhere. Michigan in both 2006 and 2016 were huge wins, although they really didn't parlay those wins into anything that was big. The 6 game was 1 versus 2. The 16 game was 2 versus 3. So those are probably some of the bigger wins that they've had. In terms of tough losses, and I'm going to kind of think about them chronologically because it'll be easier, and then maybe we can whittle it down to 4 or 5 that are the worst. But 95 against Michigan, they were undefeated, headed to the Rose Bowl. Probably one of the most talented teams they've ever had, with the Heisman Trophy winner Eddie George, Bobby Hoying, Terry Glenn, Ricky Dudley, Mike Vrabel, Sean Springs, Orlando Pace, a partridge in a pear tree of probably guys that would combine to play about 150 years in the NFL on that team, and it didn't work out. So that's probably right up there. 96, a year later, undefeated, lost at home to Michigan. 98, number 1 in the country, 8-0, lost to Nick Saban and Michigan State. At home, they were a 4-touchdown favorite, lost 28-24. They were number 1 in the BCS rankings, the first year of the BCS rankings, and they were wire-to-wire number 1 until that day, and ended up just outside the top 2 in the final pairings. Of Florida played 10, or Florida State played Tennessee in the first ever BCS National Championship game. Ohio State got edged out. So there's 3 right there. Nothing big in 99, 2000, 2001. Those teams weren't any good. 2002, they ran the table 14-0. 2003 at Wisconsin, a very rainy game. And Lee Evans caught a deep pass and out and up against Chris Gamble, knocked them from the ranks of the undefeated in 03. That was big. Nothing really that important in 04. 05, they lost at home to Texas. And this was a big one. Vince Young, man, was he I think that was the year they went on and won the national championship, and they did it on the basis of beating Ohio State early in the season in Columbus. And that was a hell of a game, like 25-22, something like that. Ohio State lost that game. Let's see, 06 lost to Florida. That's one of the bitter losses, I think, in Ohio State history, to be undefeated and get routed 41-14 by Florida in the national championship. That was terrible. Moving on, 07, 08, I don't know. 07, they lost at home to Illinois, and they lost to LSU in the championship game. Going on through, in 2010, they lost at Wisconsin, undefeated team. That was pretty bitter. 12 undefeated. 13, Michigan State in the Big Ten championship game. That was miserable. They were undefeated, headed to the playoff, and lost in Indianapolis. Had a terrible defense that year and got trampled. I think it was 34-24. So that was a tough one. 14, won the national championship despite losing to Virginia Tech. 15, lose at home to Michigan State, undefeated. That was about as bitter a loss as you'd see at home. 16, Clemson in the playoff. That was ridiculous. And so on. So to rank them, I'd say, that they were the number 1 team in 98 when they lost to Michigan State. That cost them, I think, the inside track to the national championship, because they could have played Florida State or Tennessee, neither of whom were all that great, would have been branded as the first ever BCS champions. And to lose at home the way they did, that was about as bad as it could possibly get. Blown out by Florida in the championship game, blown out by Clemson in the playoff. Those hurt. Different years. Those were terrible. There have been a few. I think I ticked off probably the 10 or 12 most terrible defeats for Ohio State over the last 25 years. But I would put Michigan State at or near the top of the list. And you could add them in for 2013 as well. That was pretty bad too, because they were headed to the playoff, no question, with the win. I don't know if that was a great Ohio State team. However, I think 98, 95, 96, 98, those were all great Ohio State teams, and just unfortunate the way it worked out. But to pinpoint one over the others, that's hard. I don't know. I'd have to really sit down and think about it. They don't lose at home very often. Texas was an epic loss. They had a 9-point lead with 5 minutes to go and blew the game, I think. I had to settle for 5 field goals in that game against Vince Young, and he was just a man. He led Texas up and down the field against the Buckeyes that day. So that's some of the ones I would look at.
Yeah, that Texas game, if I remember correctly, Ryan Hamby dropped a touchdown pass that hit him right in the hands in the back of the end zone that would have extended the lead. And again, the Buckeyes, 25-22. I believe they had a 22-13 lead.
Yes.
Fairly late in the game, and Vince Young, really stepped it up. And to consider that team went on to go undefeated and beat what was considered to be a great all-time USC team in the national championship game, it would have been interesting to see how it would have played out if the Buckeyes had held on and won that game. And again, if Hamby catches the ball,
they subsequently lost
on the road.
State. Yeah.
So Penn State had one loss. Ohio State would have had a loss, and Texas would have had one loss, with USC in the clubhouse with no losses. I guess Penn State would have gone to the national championship game. Their only loss that year was with 1 second left on the clock against Michigan.
Yeah, no question about it. It was a crazy year in the Big Ten that year in 2005 to see who was going to get to represent the Big Ten. And the Rose Bowl was closed off that year because of the championship game was played there. It was the last year before they went to the double hosting model in 2006. So the Rose Bowl was not open to the Big Ten that season. And so Penn State went to the Orange Bowl and played Florida State. Ohio State went to the Fiesta Bowl and played Notre Dame. I think the Big Ten won both those games to kind of flex its muscle that year on the national scene. But yeah, I mean, it is something when Ohio State puts itself in the position as it has through the years to play for so many championships and Rose Bowls and Big Tens and either to get into the national championship game during the BCS era or to get into the playoff now that we are in that era, and to see that the way that this has worked out here in the last few years. I hope I had my years and my format straight through that whole diatribe, but I'm sure Ohio State fans would give you their top 3 or 4, but I know for me, that 98 team, with Andy Katzenmoyer, Antoine Winfield, Joe Germain, D. Miller, across the board was one. David Boston was still there, one of the most talented teams. 95, I mean, the way they lit up the scoreboard, they didn't have the defense necessarily that a vintage Ohio State team would have had, but I think that that was a fabulous team as well. They were 11-0, I believe, going into that game at Michigan. Lost to them, and then in a matchup you wouldn't see today in the Citrus Bowl, they were both number 4. Ohio State and Tennessee were tied in the AP poll at number 4, and this was before you could kind of wildcat your way and get out there and play in one of the bigger bowl games. For whatever reason, the Big Ten, the SEC sent Ohio State and Tennessee to the Citrus Bowl to play one another. There must have been enough conferences around then that there were still tie-ins for all the major bowls. And so they played each other in the rain down there, and Tennessee won that game 20-14, kind of a meaningless game and a footnote. But one of the better teams in Ohio State history in 95 ended up 11-2. So it's kind of the way it works.
Yeah, and Eddie Georgia got stuffed at the goal line going in for a touchdown in that game, and the Buckeyes also fumbled inside like the 30-yard line going in for what could have been the game-winning touchdown against Peyton Manning and company. I'll also throw in the Michigan State game in 2013 in Indianapolis was odd in that the Buckeyes got down 17-0. They scored 24 straight. Then they gave up the final 10 to lose, the final 17 to lose 34-24. The one game that I would add to all that is the 100th game against Michigan, which would have sent the Buckeyes to a BCS championship game in 2003. Despite the loss to Wisconsin, they were 11-1. They lost to Michigan up in Ann Arbor 35-21 and went on to beat Kansas State in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, I would say so. I think you had so many guys back from that 2002 national championship team who either stuck around to play one more year or were not NFL eligible yet. They were a lot of freshmen and sophomores from the year before on the championship team that came back. And that was a very good team in 2003. But as you said, lost that game to Michigan, may have been considered, as I vaguely recall, I'm not sure that they were top 2 or top 3, but they would have been, had they beaten Michigan, they would have been a tough team to keep out of that championship mix. That was a year there may have been a split championship. What was it? USC won the Rose Bowl and LSU won
LSU. Yep.
Yeah, there may have been a split championship. So unless I'm getting my years confused, but any rate, it was that was another tough one. So many through the years, you talk about bitter losses. I mean, and really these were lopsided losses the last 2 years. When you go on the road to Iowa and lose the way that they did, and then go on the road and lose to Purdue, a team that was barely 6-6 this year, or whatever they were, 6-7, maybe with the bowl loss. That's not a team that Ohio State has any business losing to. So, those are disappointing losses, certainly. And when Ohio State ends up 5th or 6th in the final playoff standings. Those are the losses that kept you. They were fifth the year before and lost to Iowa, and sixth this year and lost to Purdue. You take those off their record, and they're in the playoff both years. So, and there were a lot of people saying they should have been in the playoff in spite of it. So, but at any rate, there's probably 15 or 20 games that we pointed out that have just been, bitter losses over these last. This is such a fun topic to discuss, but everyone's got their opinion on it.
Steve Hellwagon from BUCKNUTS joining us from 247 Sports to talk Ohio State football. Steve, we appreciate you jumping on the line.